Loading. All right. Looks like we are ready to go. So I'm doing this live session today just as a had it regularly scheduled about a month ago, but then last week we did an impromptu Q&A that came up just because I wanted to hop in and give some feedback, give some information and support on teletherapy. So we are doing a follow-up, continuing on with that Q&A because there were some questions that came up that I got to a little bit in the end, and there are also some clinical questions that have come up in the past week. So I wanted to make sure I kept this Q&A on the calendar, even though I have not, or just did one last week. So what I'm going to do, since I'm in Zoom here, I'm going to come over here and make sure that I can see your comments coming in because there we go. All right. Here we go. I've got two screens up here. When you go on Zoom, sometimes there's multiple screens, and so I can't always see the comments coming in. So I wanted to make sure I could do that. So I'm going to share my screen in a couple minutes. And so if I don't reply to your comments right away, it's because I might not be able to see your screen, but I will pop out and make sure that I am able to see everybody who's on here. So first of all, I wanted to share some really, an announcement that I'm really excited about. So last week, I did a call for anybody who was a member of any of my paid programs for teletherapy. So just to walk you through some resources that you can use to get started, some questions that have come up about HIPAA compliance, and some platform options that you could use, just some ways that you can get started in online therapy right away, because a lot of us have had to do that this past month. So I however, have just scheduled a meeting, an interview with a teletherapy expert. Her name is Tracy Sipple. It's scheduled for later this week. So we're going to be recording it later this week. So early next week, that recording will be available to you. So we're going to just dive deeper into some teletherapy issues, go into some additional platform options. I did get some clarification from her about some ways to be HIPAA compliant without paying for an expensive platform, things like that. So I am going to get some updated information from her, and I'm going to be recording that interview, and I will be actually making that available to the public, kind of like a podcast. It's going to be on my blog, but I'm also going to be sharing it in some specific locations in the members area. You guys are going to get access to that first before I share it with the public. So if you have any other questions about teletherapy that weren't fully clarified based on the call that I did last week, let me know what your questions are, because I will be able to dive deeper into them when I talk to Tracy in the interview when we record that this week. And I can hopefully get some of your questions answered. And then there'll also be some information for people if they, for example, if you're running a private practice and you want to get up and running with teletherapy for your practice, she does some consulting. And so that is going to be something that you can use. She is available for consults and things like that. So I'll have some of that information coming to you later this week. Super excited to dive into that with her. So from there, I did have some other questions that came up. Some were specific to, yes, they are things that you can work on in teletherapy with your clients, vocabulary, things like that. However, for these techniques, a lot of them are relevant whether we're doing in-person therapy or not. So there were some questions that came up about working on vocabulary, how you should select vocabulary. And so your method of communication might not be the same as it would normally be. Obviously, you might be emailing more, things like that. You can't just walk into a teacher's room like you could before, but we all have means of meeting with teachers still. So I wanted to dive into some of those questions about vocabulary, and then also some of a specific case that's come up And then some other people were asking about making some of my resources electronic, and how to work through specific types of techniques if you're doing them online. Again, my main advice would be to keep it simple, but I will walk through some of those things. I did do them briefly at the end of the previous call, but I wanted to go into that a little bit deeper today. So let me share my screen here. Let me get up in the platform, find where I was here. Okay. All right, so share my screen. Okay, so here we go. I am in the Language Therapy Advanced Foundations members area, and I wanted to point out some resources to you before we get started. So as I've mentioned before, your teletherapy resources, the Q&A call is going to be right in here. You're just going to want to click on this post. This is where it is in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. If you're in one of my other programs and you're not in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, just look for this post. Just keep scrolling down. The Good Social Language Roadmap, I put it at the bottom, but you'll be able to find it. It's in black, it looks the same. So where the editable Word documents are that I've created for you are in the materials library. So you're going to want to click on your syntax resources, your morphology and orthography resources, and then your semantics, word retrieval, and word defining resources. Those three sections are where you're going to be able to find your editable Word docs. There are also some downloads up here in the modules. Some of these same things that are available in the materials library are also in the modules, but the editable documents are not. I just put them in the materials library. So you're going to go to your syntax resources, your morphology, your orthography and phonology resources, and then your semantics, word retrieval, and word defining resources. Those are going to be the places that you're going to want to go to find those documents. All right, so that's where you can find your tools. But I wanted to answer a question that came in about vocabulary, and this comes up a lot when, just when people are getting started. So some people say, I'm having a hard time getting started with vocabulary intervention, and, can you help me out? So first of all, if you have that question, number one, when it comes to vocabulary selection, usually when we're doing any of these techniques that I walk through in any of these Language Therapy Advanced modules, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to figure out what kind of vocabulary your students are being exposed to in the curriculum. So a lot of people are saying things like, what's age appropriate? The real question you want to be asking is what vocabulary are they being exposed to? Because vocabulary and what's age appropriate is highly dependent on exposure. So if they're being exposed to it, then that means that they're likely going to know it. And if they're not, then the chances that they're not going to know it. So asking what's age appropriate is kind of challenging because it's so variable based on the environment. So the real question you want to be asking is what's going on in the curriculum. So the best place that you can go to find vocabulary is, again, if you're in the Vocabulary Foundation, that is my course where I talk about vocabulary selection. And in that course, I do give you an ebook called the 540 Tier 2 Words ebook. And in that book, I give you Tier 2 words for kindergarten through 8th grade. Now you want to think about that as a guideline and a starting point, or in lots of examples that you can start with. And so words that you can pull from that are Tier 2 vocabulary, that are going to be robust words that already have been pulled from grade level curriculums. But you don't want to use it rigidly, thinking like these words on the kindergarten list are the only words I can target on kindergarten, and I can only work on these words in kindergarten. Or even if you've got kids that are maybe just starting high school, it doesn't mean that you can't use some of those words on the list that are maybe from 7th or 8th grade. So you want to use it as a guideline or a starting point, and a lot of examples of what would include Tier 2 vocabulary, but not as something that's like, we have to get through these words in this amount of time. use it as a lot of examples and a starting point. Now, if you're not in the vocabulary foundation, or if you are in a situation where you want to really stay aligned with what's going on in the reading curriculum, another good place you can start finding words is from the materials, the language arts materials. A lot of times the curriculums will pull tier 2 vocabulary out. So what you can be doing is talking to your teachers and figuring out what reading units they're doing over the year, and then start pulling vocabulary out of those. You can also be looking at assessments in the other areas, like the content areas and math, and be looking at some of the terms that are coming up over and over again on the tests, like summarize, evaluate, those kinds of words. And rather than feeling like you need to be unit specific, you want to pick words that you think your students are going to need to know throughout the course of the year, because it is going to be really hard for you to figure out, okay, these words are going to be, the ones that I have to do this month, and these are the words I'm going to have to be doing this month. I would aim to start with, pick 1 to 3 words to target within a week with your students, and use those words as targets and probes that you can use while you're playing around and going through these strategies in Language Therapy Advanced. So rather than thinking of it as a word list you have to get through, use them as probes that you can use and examples that you can use to show kids how to be more meta with words, rather than feeling like I've got to get through all these words. It's more important to focus on the process of studying words, which is what I show you in these Language Therapy Advanced modules, than it is to feel like you have to get through a set word list. So with that all being said, if you're feeling like you have a hard time getting started, talk to the teachers, pull out a list of words that are tier 2 words, and start with those. Don't overthink it. Just pick some words and go with it. Start playing around with these strategies. Don't worry too much about it. Just pick some words and get started. If your students, if they're too difficult, it's okay. And I even recommend that sometimes you even start doing some of these strategies in Language Therapy Advanced with just basic words that that kids are familiar with, so you can get them familiar with the strategies. That's okay too. Again, don't worry about getting through a set amount of words. Worry about teaching them the process of studying words and paying attention to words. That's what's going to help them really boost their vocabulary in the long run. So that's my first part if you are feeling like, where do I get started? And the second thing is, make sure you have gone through module 1. A lot of times people will say, I don't know where to get started. I don't know what to do. And then I look, I can actually see when people have gone through in your dashboard, I can log in and see where, what modules you've watched. And so a lot of times I can see if people are saying, oh, I'm confused about this. I can log in and see what modules they haven't watched. And that gives me some insight about what information they might be missing, so that I can guide them and say, okay, you need some clarity on that. I see you haven't watched this module. This is going to help you out. And that way I can see, again, part of that is for our tracking, for our continuing education, things like that. But part of that is just so that we've got information about how you're doing and your progress in the course. So a lot of times I've noticed that when people are struggling to work through this process with their students and they're feeling confused and overwhelmed, I'll look and I'll notice that they haven't actually gone through all of the course content. So keep with this content, go through all of it. If you need to rewatch it, that's okay. You don't need to rush it. But make sure you go through all these videos. And if it's been a while since you've gone through these videos, watch them again. I am actually in a personal development program, and I am completely starting from the beginning, even though I already went through it in the fall. And I am picking up on things that I missed the first time around that just didn't quite click for me. So if you're in the program and you're feeling like, I forgot about this or that, go through, start from the beginning. And if you're in the program now, don't skip ahead. Start with module 1 and go through all of these, because they are going to explain how to work through all of these strategies. And I promise that when you go through all of it and when you start to work through these with some of your students, it is going to start to make sense. there are a lot of people in this program that have been going through the process for a while, and they're still picking up on different things that maybe they missed the first time around, or places where they can dive deeper and further, make their therapy strategies even more sophisticated. So this success path video gives a good overview of the big picture of how all the strategies work together. And so this is going to be something that if you're kind of forgetting how the strategies work together, that's going to be a great place for you to, figure out how to put it all together and understand what's coming. Another video where I do give a synopsis of how this goes together is when you get to module 5, I tie it all together, because at that point, that's when I've gone through all the 5 areas and shown you a strategy for all 5 areas that we target in the essential 5. So semantics, syntax, morphology, orthography, and phonology. And I review that success path again now that we've gone through all of it. But then in this building carryover final module here final video of module 6, I also pull it together and show you how to work on some of those carryover strategies. So with that all being said, those are some key points that are going to give you an overview. But if you're trying to figure out how to get started with vocabulary, if you've got some of those word lists, if you've got some things from teachers, reading curriculums, just start pulling some vocabulary from those and get started. Don't worry if you aren't picking the perfect words right away. You're not going to mess this up if you're working through these strategies with your students. And you're not sure if it's the right word that's age appropriate or whatever. It's okay. It's more important for them to work on this process, and it's okay if they don't fully understand what that word means at the end of the session. It's okay if it's a word that they already know and you're just solidifying the process with them. You guys are not going to screw this up. So just, again, just dive in, don't overanalyze, just, trust that you are going to work through this and know what to do and further understand this process as you go through it. All right. With that being said, I wanted to pop over to an email that I got that actually dives into that question about vocabulary selection. So somebody had asked about, where do I start with vocabulary? How do I choose vocabulary? I've given you a basic explanation there, but somebody had given me a specific case study. Let me go through here. Okay, here it is. Okay, so I am going to walk through this case study because it dives further into how do I pick vocabulary. It's kind of the next stage. Like once you've been going through this process for a while, what can you, like when specific cases come up that you've got to troubleshoot, how do you work? Okay, so I am going to just read it. So it says, I have a new student who just completed his re-eval. He's in 7th grade, a lot of difficulty with vocabulary, has goals, and I'm going to sum up the goal. I know that some of you have specific formats that you need to say for your district, but basically we'll describe vocabulary words using 3 to 4 opportunities or 3 to 4 attributes on 4 or 5 opportunities across 3 consecutive sessions. And then there was some other verbiage in there about the amount of support, which may or may not be necessary, but that's the main part of the goal. We'll describe vocabulary words using 3 to 4 attributes on 4 to 5 opportunities across 3 consecutive sessions. We'll write definitions of targeted vocabulary words found in reading passages on 4 out of 5 opportunities, 3 consecutive sessions, and we'll answer comprehension questions found in reading passages by demonstrating understanding of targeted vocabulary words in his responses on 4 out of 5 opportunities across 3 consecutive sessions. So she's first question is, are these goals on track? So what I like about these goals is that we've got one that's about describing vocabulary words. So again, we're addressing semantics there, something we could do verbally. And then we've got a goal about writing definitions from using context of reading passages. So we've got the basic goal there. And then we've got another goal that's going to be we'll be able to write a definition based on the information from reading passages. So we're taking it a step further and we're adding a more sophisticated comprehension component. So I like that. And then it looks like the other goal was answering comprehension questions that demonstrate that he understands vocabulary words. So with the goals, I would say try to keep them not, you don't want them to be too wordy, but yes, these three things, so being able to say the definition, being able to say the definition given information from a reading passage, and then being able to answer a question that demonstrates his understanding of a specific word based on something he's read. So yes, that's a very good progression of going from those foundational skills that we teach in Language Therapy Advanced to pulling in some of those high-level comprehension skills. So as you go through these modules, again, those comprehension things are more module 6 of, once you've gone through these foundational strategies. But again, this particular person who asked this question has been in the program for a while, so she's been cycling through a lot of these techniques with these students, and so she's been able to figure out how to develop this sophisticated system. So first question, am I on the right track with the goals? Yes, I like how there's a nice progression there. You have still linked vocabulary to comprehension, but at the same time, you haven't just jumped right to comprehension and said, well, answer WH questions and then not address the vocabulary at all. So there's a good linkage there between those and a good progression from from an easier goal to more sophisticated. So the other question that came up is that in the IEP meeting, the mom said she's concerned about learning vocabulary for the core classes like science. And then the special ed case manager asked if the SLP could help with that and sent the current science vocabulary. And then the SLP saying, hey, I'm not a science tutor. I'm not going to sit there and drill flashcards with your student. My goal is to build solid strategies for the long haul, not just help my student, try to memorize words for his science test. So how do we work as a team, support the student on their immediate needs? Because it is important that a student gets good grades. There are certain things that need to be done right away, but then at the same time be focused on the long haul. And so she was saying that what she did, she gave me some examples of vocabulary. And so there's lots of, it's, genetics, chromosome, DNA, some other words that I'm pretty sure that I'm going to butcher if I try to pronounce them, but it's genetic type of vocabulary for a specific science unit. And so what she said is that, I'm not an expert in this curriculum. I know that I'm probably not going to teach it as well as what a science teacher would, but maybe there are some ways I can use these vocabulary and pull out some specific terms to support what I'm already doing in therapy and still, support that concept of the process rather than just the content, and give him some strategies that he's going to be able to use, not just in this unit, beyond. So what she did is that she pulled out some of those words. So for example, homozygous and heterozygous, there's different prefixes and suffixes there. And so she's done some morphology work. She's saying, maybe I could pull those out and say, okay, here, give some examples of some of the tier 2 vocabulary that they've done and said, all right, let's apply that to these words right here and look at some of those spelling and morphological patterns. Or one of the example is, there's like asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, and there's a prefix in there. So maybe we could talk about that, and then we could talk about how that impacts the meaning of the entire word. And so she pulled out some specific things done with morpheme studies. And so she's still talking about the science vocabulary, but it's thinking beyond. It's using what's going on right now, but thinking beyond just, this specific unit. I would say, absolutely on track with your thinking there. And this is a great way to pull in what's going on in the curriculum, but still to stay true to your role of the language expert that's going to teach students patterns and not just thinking of like, let's slap a Band-Aid on this and, be a science tutor. So this is a great way to find that balance between And again, when I say start with tier 2 vocabulary, that is a good starting point because a lot of those words are going to be things that come up over and over again, but that doesn't mean that there aren't times in therapy when it isn't okay to be pulling in some of these tier 2 words if they fit into that whole process. So this is a great way to go through and look at some of those things. One other word that she pulled out was the word dominant. So that's related to this unit, but then there's also, that's also a word that's comes up kind of a lot. There are some words that when they're thought of in context of the vocabulary unit. So for example, the word dominant, it's the definition given here is a rod-shaped, oh wait, no, hold on. I'm reading the wrong definition. The definition for dominant is a trait that always shows up in the organism or covers up another trait. So speaking about dominant in the context of genetics, that's what it means. So there's a couple things you can do here. You can look a trait. So a trait would be the category in that definition. Or wait, no. Actually, now that I'm looking at that, dominant is more of like a dominant trait would be a noun, but if you're looking at the word dominant, it's an adjective. So you're going to want to make that distinction. So if you're saying a trait, you have to make sure that you're clarifying that you're talking about dominant trait, not just the descriptor dominant. But what you can do there, and again, see, I got confused explaining that. That might happen when you're talking through some of these things with your students. So it's okay to say, wait, you know what? Let me back up here. So the other thing with that word is that in other contexts, the word dominant could be an adjective to describe being a certain way. So you could talk about how, okay, in this context, it means this, but there's also some other meanings of the word here. And so then you're giving them some information about how you can use that word beyond just the context of this unit. So you can sometimes pull out words that are tier 2, like in some contexts they're tier 3, sometimes they're tier 2. Don't feel like you've got to just do it a certain way. So I think that's a really good example of, again, how to take that process of choosing vocabulary and make it a little more sophisticated, and take this process that you're learning in language therapy advance of studying vocabulary and just, go on and make it more sophisticated. So those are the big questions that came up today. What else I wanted to do right now is I'm just going to show you a couple things now that since I've still got the dashboard up. I'm going to download a couple things here. Let me see here. So on the end of your of the teletherapy call, I gave an example of how you can walk through a strategy to work on sentence structure, but I wanted to also talk a little bit about how you might use another syntax strategy in a teletherapy session. So what you could do, if you went to let's look in your syntax resources. So what we've got here, again, the ultimate guides to syntax are right here. So that's where you're going to want to find all of your tools for doing things like sentence combining. But if you want to do some of the things that are more in line with semantic feature analysis and definition syntax, then you can go here. So what you've got here are some different documents that are some of your worksheets that we have. So for example, if I went here to the meta definitions for nouns, so what you can do here is that you can download this Word document. It's going to come up on my other screen here. Okay, and so then you have this whole document up here. Let me make sure that I'm sharing my right screen here. Share this again. Okay. So here we have your definitions worksheet. So what you can do is, since this is a Word document, you could actually, you could take this document and edit it, and maybe even just like delete all of this and just, just have this stuff here, or you could just leave this the same with all these explanations and then just type different things on this line and keep filling it in with different examples. So for example, you could even pull this up in your session and share your screen with your students. And then you could just say, you could just fill in the word right here. You could say something like, let me look at some of those examples that were in this. So for example, a dominant trait is trait, or a dominant gene is a trait. Let's see, wait, hold on. A dominant gene. You could just fill it in here. You can make your font smaller if you need to. Is a trait that, and the definition here is that always, whoops, hold on here. Gotta make sure that you're on the line. You might want to delete this right here and just go right to the line and just say that always shows up or covers up another trait. So you're simply going to do this the same way that you would do it in an in-person group. However, what you can do is your students can be dictating this while you're typing it. You could just take this, copy and paste this entire sentence structure, put it in a Google Doc for your students. And then if you share that Google Doc and give them editing capabilities, then they could pull it up on their screen and you can all be editing that document at the same time. If you do have the ability, if you're using a platform that allows them to give remote access, then you can give them access to your screen so they can go in and type it in. Or you can just simply maybe have them type their answers into the chat. You can do it verbally. There's a lot of different ways. But what you can do is just go through, and you can use these as worksheets. All you're going to be doing that's different is simply like verbally dictating to them and maybe having a screen, something up on the screen where you're typing in what they're saying, where you have some kind of a visual. Yes, you could just take, a piece of notebook and write it down and show it to them. I would say that now that we have sophisticated screen share options, it might be a better option to share your screen so that you've got that whiteboard up there to guide you through the lesson. But even something like a simple Google Doc or a Word doc will work. And that's why I've made these things accessible to you via Word doc. So that's just an example of where you can go to get some of those tools and how you can walk through and take some of those words, fill these out, and how these documents can work for you. So again, now that they're editable, you can edit them and edit the formatting how you see fit. And you can use these however you need for teletherapy sessions. And then also something else is that, let me actually go to my Facebook group here so I can see if I've got any comments coming through. As I've been sharing my screen with you guys, I haven't been able to see if comments have come in. So let me make sure, let me go into the group here. But yeah, basically with all of these editable documents, you're just gonna wanna go through, play around with them, figure out different ways that you can make your online therapy session as close to a regular therapy session as possible. It's just a matter of learning a different way of doing things. All right. Okay, so it looks like some people have been watching. I don't see any questions coming in. I do have my page up now where I can see see the comments coming in. Before, when I was screen sharing, I couldn't see it. So everybody who's on now, I've gone through most of the questions that have been submitted. What other questions do you have about, again, I know teletherapy is a big topic right away. Or right now, but if you've got any other questions about specific clinical course content, let me know as well. There is a little bit of a delay from me talking to you guys to when it actually gets to your screen. I'm going to wait just a couple minutes so I can make sure that there aren't any follow-up questions. Again, if you are watching this later on, I know a lot of people emailed me and said, hey, can you share the recording with me? You know, I'm going to be on a session. We've got a meeting, whatever it is. If you're watching this later on and you have follow-up questions, feel free to just start a separate thread in the group and let me know what your questions are. I will either answer it in the group. A lot of times what I do is I will answer your question in the group and do the best I can. But sometimes if I know it's kind of a very in-depth question with a lengthy response, what I'll do is that I will do my best to answer your question right away, but then save it for the next live Q&A and dive into it a little bit further, because chances are a lot of times people will have a question and chances are a good portion of the other people in the group have a question that's related to it, or maybe, you know, a lot of times you're kind of confused and you're not quite sure what question you have. So seeing other people's questions articulated with an answer can sometimes help you figure out what your questions are or give you the answers that you need. So regardless of if you're watching now, if you're watching later, and you think of something that comes up that you want to know about how to, you know, again, teletherapy related questions relating to this program or just related to specific clinical techniques, then, you know, again, that is something that we can continue to address with the group. I normally do Q&As once a month. However, I did one last week, did one this week, just because I know there's a lot going on with everybody. Everybody's kind of scrambling to figure out teletherapy. So with that all being said, you know, I might be doing them more frequently if I need to. Like if I've got a lot of questions that are coming in, I will hop in and do a live session if I feel like I need to do that. I'm certainly here for you, but I will at least be doing Q&As once a month in depth, if not more. So let me know what your teletherapy questions are, because I'm recording that interview Thursday with the teletherapy expert. So super excited about that. And let me know what your other course questions are. And take care, everybody. And thank you so much, everybody, for hopping on today.